on Facebook. I'm going to give it a few seconds. Thanks for your patience. Big show today. Big thanks to everybody that sent me some birthday wishes yesterday. 39 and feeling fine. What's up, fam? It's me, your boy Mog. This is Wake Up Wyoming here on Wake Up News on Fascist Book. Thank you all for tuning in. Give it a like, give it a share. If you really want to build an audience, go ahead and start a personal watch party on your own wall and invite all your friends. And let's see what happens. Thanks for tuning in. We got a big show. Again, thanks to everybody who wished me well on my birthday yesterday. Had a great time. Let's get into it. Big show. Somebody shared this little meme, and I thought this was interesting. Have you realized that this is a global IQ test to compile resistance versus compliance data yet? Thought-provoking notion to start the show off here today. Something to ponder as we proceed through the absurd lockdowns, this absurd state of medical martial law, and circling the globe. I don't see any comments yet. Chime in there in the comments. Let me know where you're coming from, what you're thinking. Looking at the least reliable figures out there these days. Again, good morning, Linda. Thanks for tuning in. Everybody else, holler at me. I want to see some comments there. Again, we can't trust these stats from the Johns Hopkins Center for System Science and Engineering because they were involved in the Bill and Melinda Gates World Economic Forum and Johns Hopkins Event 201 pandemic exercise. But even looking at the most doomy, gloomy statistics out there, only 3 million confirmed cases of COVID worldwide, 212,000 total deaths. Again, if you read the fine print on this Johns Hopkins map, this includes presumed positive cases in accordance with CDC guidelines, and the death totals also include confirmed and probable cases in accordance with the CDC guidelines of April 14th. Again, their sources of information on this map totally bunk, but they're saying 3 million total cases. Contrast that with this BBC article quoting Oxfam from April 9th, 2020, pushing 500 million people into poverty. Not the virus itself. Again, it's funny how the mainstream always blames the virus, never blames the official response to the virus, right? Forbes, one country that hasn't swallowed the blue pill completely, one country that hasn't followed in lockstep shutdown of the world is Sweden. And in Sweden, as Forbes is telling us, published yesterday, the predicted coronavirus catastrophe hasn't arrived in Sweden. What's next? Around Stockholm lately, it appears as if a growing number of people are moving on from the early depths of coronavirus anxiety. Sweden, as we all know, has maintained a higher degree of normalcy than most other countries over the past 6 weeks. But just as in most places, movement has been down, travel all but stopped, and consumer spending much reduced. Though Swedes are still encouraged to keep a distance, work from home, and avoid non-essential travel as before, there are signs that many are now deciding to get back to something resembling life before the virus. It's unclear whether that's warranted or advisable, but it's happening either way. They give some examples here. Important to note, all these changes, people getting back to work, people reopening hair salons, and people spending more time outside, congregating in groups. All this follows a handful of mostly optimistic reports from the Public Health Agency in Sweden, indicating that the rate of new infections and deaths remains stable, even as numbers continue to rise. The number of people in intensive care at any one time has stayed flat, and most of the field hospitals that were set up in March remain empty. Of particular interest are reports that around 1/4 of Stockholm, some say even more, is believed to have already had the virus. Though that number has been debated, several experts appear increasingly confident that the number of asymptomatic cases is much higher than initially thought. We covered it on the show recently that in New York, they did a big study, a big random antibody study, and found that 21% of New Yorkers, if you extrapolate out from the data, 21% of New Yorkers already had the virus. Back to the article. Now is an especially interesting time to keep an eye on what happens as many countries around Europe, including Sweden's Nordic neighbors, begin to ease restrictions themselves. Swedish authorities seem to have accepted that infections and deaths would inevitably climb at a certain rate, so the numbers here look much worse than in neighboring countries. Having avoided wider infections up to now, will countries like Denmark and Norway soon see a surge in cases when they try to open up? Will Swedes, having been infected more widely at a reasonably controlled pace, now be better off than everyone else as we attempt to restart economic activity? Or could it be that things take a different turn, with Swedes suddenly seeing case numbers jump and a lockdown imposed, just as everyone else is beginning to emerge? All are questions with ramifications for the entire world. Everyone will no doubt be waiting and watching to see what happens. So interesting thoughts there from Forbes. A couple of little memes here that I thought you guys might find interesting. You know, if we want to be factual, things that suppress our immune systems, right? Getting out in nature, interacting with people. Our immune systems are designed to be exposed to germs. So when you're wearing a mask all the time, wearing gloves all the time, you're not going outside, you're not getting any sunshine, you are continually living in a state of fear, which we've seen no shortage of. Washing your hands with synthetic soaps all day long. All of those things will in fact suppress your immune system. At least the government has been consistent in always giving us the worst health info possible. Good to see people out there protesting. Who's taking some flack? Well, Billy Gates, and I think that's probably warranted. The world is waking up. That's why they want to shut it down before they lose control. Some great signs here at a rally. Bill Gates is the fucking virus. Fuck Bill Gates, etc. Important to note, this is all confirmed data here in this meme, or confirmed. You can go find stories, mainstream stories going back for the last decade confirming all this. If you trust someone who has 500,000 shares of Monsanto, injured thousands of people with vaccines, plans to block out the sun, of course that's in reference to geoengineering, advocated for microchipping, and sponsored Marina Abramovic, that's the so-called artist that John Podesta was such a fan of, the spirit cooking artist, Marina Abramovic. Microsoft actually put out an ad featuring her recently and pulled it real quick. But if you trust someone who has done all of those things, you might be a special kind of stupid. Important to note, too, I thought this meme was worth sharing. Our government is now telling us that we can get the COVID-19 virus, recover from it, but still not be immune. However, simultaneously, they're telling us that a vaccine containing this same exact virus, one they claim they still don't understand, is going to give us that immunity and make us safe. You don't need to be a scientist to see what's really going on here. Okay, think about it. The World Health Organization, again, it's important to note that now that the U.S. has stopped funding the World Health Organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the largest donor to the World Health Organization. Obviously, they're pushing hard for a vaccine. And if you read the recent fear porn coming out of the mainstream, the World Health Organization repeatedly telling us that being exposed to coronavirus, catching coronavirus, recovering from coronavirus, and developing antibodies to the coronavirus does not give you immunity, which is an absurd and nonsensical statement if you understand anything about the way the human body works, the way the immune system works. But at the same time, they're telling us that developing antibodies to the coronavirus does not give you immunity. They're simultaneously pushing for a global vaccine initiative, perhaps mandatory vaccines. Perhaps you need to have the vaccine to be able to move freely or go back to work. Yet their statements blatantly contradict one another. We were talking briefly there about Billy Gates owning stock in Monsanto. Of course, Monsanto was bought by Bayer recently, and now Bayer is cracking down. They're more stringent in their glyphosate settlement talks due to the downturn. That's right, people have been suing Bayer, which now owns Monsanto, because their pesticides have been proven to cause cancer. German drugs and pesticides company Bayer said the economic downturn due to the coronavirus has prompted it to take a tougher stance in talks to settle claims its glyphosate-based weed killers cause cancer. The pandemic has significantly slowed the mediation process, it said in a statement on Monday. The company will consider a deal only if it is financially reasonable and puts in place a mechanism to resolve potential future claims efficiently. Against the background of a looming recession, looking at, in part, considerable liquidity challenges, this applies now more than ever before, Chief Executive Werner Baumann said. The company added that fourth quarter adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization rose 10.2% to 4.4 billion euros, beating average analyst expectation of 4.17. So Bayer / Monsanto doing fine in the midst of the recession, and talking about cracking down more aggressively in the litigation against them, because it's been proven that their pesticides do in fact cause cancer. One thing that keeps popping up in my mind as this situation proceeds, I can't help but remember the 2012 Olympics opening ceremonies. And if you guys remember that, they had this, it was pretty damn creepy. They had all these doctors and nurses out there surrounding these empty hospital beds with this giant baby statue. And in the midst of all that, that's just the NPR coverage of it. There you get another view of that strange ceremony, strange ritual at the London 2012 Olympics, where they had all these doctors and nurses standing around empty beds, the creepy baby, and then in the midst of it, they had this giant demonic specter with a wand. Just the sort of stuff that makes you go, Somebody posted a nice meme about that. David Dees, if you're not familiar with his work, David Dees, brilliant artist who's been at it for a long time. Do you remember the 2012 Olympics with the giant black figure and all the hospital beds? It's starting to make a lot more sense now. Kind of is. Important to note, we were just talking about the vaccine before I went into that little aside. I'm not trying to make any conclusions based on that, but it's interesting. You watch these rituals, you watch these ceremonies at stuff like the Olympics and the Super Bowl, and it seems like an instance of predictive programming. Market Watch published yesterday, we will not have a vaccine by next winter. Like the 1918 Spanish flu, the CDC says the second wave of coronavirus could be worse. So what happens now? We'll see. It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if, in the wake of this fiasco, in the wake of these lockdowns, once the world returns to some semblance of normalcy, once people go back to work, what if we get hit with another virus? What if we get hit with another new epidemic of sorts that is in fact much worse than the coronavirus, and that is used to support the notion that these lockdowns were essential? What if this is just the opening stage, the opening salvo, if you will, of a global biomedical war? Could be. These are the sorts of thoughts that are on my mind these days, and I hope you all are thinking about this sort of stuff too. Let's look at some economic and financial news. Published April 27th, another from Market Watch. Intercontinental hotels occupancy at open hotels in the low to mid 20% range. Of course, all aspects of the economy, all aspects of the real economy, the financial system's doing fine. People are making billions, if not trillions of dollars by capitalizing on this crisis, while businesses that provide real services like hotels, like oil companies, like automakers, and even the healthcare system itself are suffering massive losses. We are moving into the end game, says Tyler Durden over there at Zero Hedge, published yesterday. 27 tankers anchored off California, hundreds off Singapore, as the oil industry shuts down. Okay, that's a bummer. But even more concerning is the crisis going on in the food system. Mint Press News letting us know, as food banks struggle to cope with demand, desperate farmers are dumping unsellable produce. The coronavirus pandemic is shaking America's food supply and production system. And after only a few weeks, it appears much of it is failing the stress test. Yahoo Finance letting us know, published on April 26th, that Russia, the world's biggest wheat supplier, the world's biggest wheat exporter, is going going to cut their exports significantly here. For the first time in a decade, the world risks being cut off from Russian wheat at a time when some key buyers are rushing to import it. The top shipper, Russia, last month limited sales through June to protect its own supply as the coronavirus crisis sparks a food security concerns around the world. Although the curbs were seen loose enough to ensure normal trade flows for this time of year, Russia has already burned through the entire quota. It will halt grain shipments to all but 4 former Soviet neighbors once the last cargo booked under the limits leaves the country. Fortunately, the ban is only in effect until farmers start harvesting in late July. So that's good news, but we'll see what happens here. The New York Times published a couple days ago, April 22nd, letting us know, instead of coronavirus, the hunger will kill us. A global food crisis looms. The world has never faced a hunger emergency like this, experts say. It could double the number of people facing acute hunger to 265 million by the end of the year. Okay. So right now, even the most doomy, gloomy, fear-porny statistics, heavily cooked statistics coming from Johns Hopkins, the Event 201 Associated Academic and Propaganda Institution, is telling us that so far worldwide there are only 3 million confirmed or probable or presumed coronavirus cases. And at the same time, the BBC, Oxfam, letting us know that 500 million people are forecast to fall into poverty due to the official response to the coronavirus. And now the New York Times letting us know that the number of people facing acute hunger could double from 132 million to 265 million. Of course, we all know that it's hard to stay healthy. It's hard to fight a disease. It's hard to fight for equality and freedom when you are starving to death. Okay, I'm going to paste that one into the links. There's a great, give that one a read if you feel so inclined. I don't think that one's behind their paywall. There's a great recent post from Robert F. Kennedy, the son of the murdered politician and the nephew of the murdered president, John F. Kennedy. I'm going to read you this one because it's real thought-provoking. Whoa, chair down. Many scientists are modeling the number of deaths from COVID-19, but who is modeling the number of deaths from quarantine? Okay, The Big Short. The more pessimistic Health and Human Services model predict 100,000 to 240,000 COVID deaths in the United States this year. A highly respected 1982 academic research book, Corporate Flight: The Causes and Consequences of Economic Dislocation by Bluestone, Harrison, and Baker, estimates that every additional 1% rise in unemployment causes 37,000 excess deaths. These are U.S. statistics based off the 1982 academic research book, Corporate Flight. Every additional 1% rise in unemployment causes 37,000 excess deaths, including 20,000 heart attacks, 920 suicides, 650 homicides, and 4,000 mental health admissions, and 3,300 state prison admissions. On March 24th, 2020, the Federal Reserve Bank, private profit-driven bank, predicted a 30% rise in unemployment from the coronavirus quarantine. That equals 1,100,000 additional deaths, almost 5 times the government's worst predictions for COVID-19 deaths. Add additional deaths from disrupted supply chains for food and meds, and from deferred medical treatments for non-emergency ills like diabetes and hypertension. Moreover, a growing body of research finds social isolation is lethal. Sayer G. of GreenMed Info has reprinted 13 studies showing dramatic increases in deaths from isolation. Social isolation, a predictor of mortality comparable to traditional clinical risk factors, found social isolation as strong a factor in mortality risk as smoking and higher than having high blood pressure. Another article, The Pandemic America Forgot About, concluded loneliness and social isolation have the same cardiovascular effects as smoking 15 cigarettes per day and also increase the risk of all-cause morbidity. Loneliness increases the risk of developing dementia by 50% and stroke by 32%, while dramatically increasing the cancer risks, according to a 1997 Journal of the American Medical Association study, Social Ties and Susceptibility to the Common Cold. Researchers found that isolation increases susceptibility to the common cold and respiratory infection. More diverse social networks were associated with greater resistance to upper respiratory illness. A 2015 study found that men experienced an 85% increased risk of mortality following losing their jobs. Moreover, a 2020 Lancet study on the psychobiological effects of quarantine and how to reduce it found most of the adverse effects, suicide, anger, and illness, come from restriction of liberty and separation from loved ones. So big thanks to Robert F. Kennedy, son of a murdered politician, nephew of a murdered president, for speaking up with his powerful platform. It's important to note Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds, brilliant thinker Charles Hugh Smith, published yesterday, "The crash has only just begun. Everything, including a rational, connected to reality, effective financial system, is on back order and unlikely to ship any time soon." While the stock market euphorically front runs the Fed in a V-shaped recovery, the reality is the crash has only just begun. To understand why, look at income and debt. Income, earned and unearned, is in free fall, while debt, which must be serviced by income, is exploding higher. Bailouts are not a permanent substitute for income. In the short term, bailouts, in the form of payments to everyone who's lost their source of earned income, is a necessary substitute for lost income. But longer term, subsidized income with borrowed money weakens the currency and the economy as productivity stagnates. As for servicing debt, the unemployed working class is getting an extra $600 a week, not out of kindness, but to make sure these households can continue to service their debts. Auto and truck loans, student loans, credit cards, etc. Absent a federal bailout, millions of unemployed would cease making loan payments, creating a financial crisis for lenders. Investment income is also crashing as companies slash dividends and stock market gains dry up. Oil exporters are facing a $1.2 trillion cut in annual income, and institutional property owners are facing steep declines as tenants stop paying rent, and structural declines in employment will pressure rents lower in housing and commercial properties. As the housing market implodes, capital gains from flipping houses will also collapse. As corporate America realizes it no longer needs vast office spaces for its reduced workforce, as millions are working from home, the demand for commercial properties will fall off a cliff, and the rental income generated by commercial property will also fall off the same cliff. Even if interest rates fall to zero, the interest paid by borrowers will not be zero. But even if borrowers get very low rates, they still have to make the monthly principal payments, which can each run into hundreds of dollars. Lowering interest rates doesn't reduce the principal payments or reduce the interest due to zero. Indeed, the student loan and credit card rackets are experts at sucking borrowers dry with late fees and much higher rates than initially advertised. Capital isn't flowing into productive investments. It's front-running the Federal Reserve's free money for financiers in grossly overvalued stocks and seeking dead money safe havens. The money that's being sent to unemployed workers is borrowed, and small businesses are being offered loans, much of which will be forgiven if the funds are used to pay wages. In other words, all of these trillions of dollars being substituted for earned income are borrowed. And with capital going to grossly overvalued big tech stocks and dead money safe havens, there are no capital flows which will support a return to commerce and productivity that will pay wages or generate investment income. Bulls can argue that this time is different, that debt doesn't matter and earnings don't matter, but where is the history to support their claim that capital flowing into overvalued stocks is going to generate earned income that can service the exploding debt load? The crash has only just begun. Everything, including a rational, connected to reality, effective financial system, is on back order and unlikely to ship any time soon. So check that out. Charles Hugh Smith, always a thought-provoking read. I'm going to paste him in there. If you want to follow one blog, I would recommend that one. No big surprise here. CNBC letting us know the economic damage from the coronavirus is hitting the lowest level of wage earners hardest. Again, I can't stress this enough. The economic damage is not due to the coronavirus. It is due to the official fascist response to the coronavirus. Big difference. So, but the point is the lowest level of wage earners are getting hit the hardest. At the same time, according to Mint Press News, published yesterday, America's super rich see their wealth rise by $282 billion in 3 weeks of pandemic. This should be no surprise to anybody who has read The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, a brilliant 2009 book about disaster capitalism, right? The billionaires know the best time to buy is when there's blood in the streets, and there is plenty of blood in the streets right now, financially speaking. Babylon Bee, always good for a laugh. Better than The Onion, in my opinion. Inspiring. Celebrities spell out we're all in this together with their yachts. Obviously, this is a bit of satire, but it's important to note, it's pretty wild when you see all these celebs and famous politicians. This video of Arnold Schwarzenegger always sticks with me because there he is sitting in his hot tub at his mansion, smoking a cigar, telling people that they got to stay home, telling people that we're all in this together while he's lounging at a mansion. The average American in no way enjoying a lifestyle like that. This is a good read. I'll paste that one in if anybody wants to get a little giggle out of the situation. There you go. Short show today. So, yachts spelling this together at the same time. The military's Blue Angels and Thunderbirds are doing flyovers. These, according to the folks here at taskandpurpose.com, published on the 23rd. This might not be the best course of action. The DoD is going to fly fighter jets in honor of healthcare workers. What they actually need are masks and other personal protection equipment. Again, it's possible, and in fact, it's my opinion, and it's what I strive to do here on the show, to be hypercritical of the government, the mainstream media, and the medical insurance pharmaceutical complex without attacking the actual frontline healthcare workers that are trying to save lives, people that are actually being exposed to this disease, people that are putting themselves at risk, even though the risk of the coronavirus doesn't seem to be near as dire as what we were told when we were getting hyped up with an incessant stream of fear porn to justify this unprecedented state of medical martial law, this orchestrated global financial and economic collapse. But somehow the government, the military industrial complex, thinks that taking a bunch of these weapons of war and flying them over major American cities is somehow honoring us. It's pretty absurd. I guess it's no big surprise, though, when you consider this article from Defense News, published 22 hours ago. Global defense spending sees its biggest spike in a decade. Washington, global defense spending hit $1.917 trillion in 2019, a 3.6% increase over previous year figures, and the largest increase in 1 year since 2010, according to the annual report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. The U.S. remains the world's largest defense spender in 2019, with its $732 billion spending representing 38% of global military spending. SIPRI has reported that was followed by China, 14% of global total, India, 3.7% of global total, Russia, 3.4%, and Saudi Arabia at 3.2%. All told, the top 5 nations accounted for 62% of overall military spending. Global military expenditure was 7.2% higher in 2019 than it was in 2010, showing a trend that military spending growth has accelerated in recent years. Nan Tian of SIPRI said in a statement, "This is the highest level of spending since the 2008 global financial crisis and probably represents a peak in expenditure." Okay, I'm going to pop up here another little Fact sheet here, 11 facts about global poverty. Again, reason number one for my 12 reasons that this absurd state of medical martial law, these lockdowns should end. Oxfam estimates that it would take $60 billion annually to end extreme global poverty. That's less than 1/4 the income of the top 100 richest billionaires. We just saw from Mint Press News, they're saying the wealth of the billionaires has increased by almost $300 billion in the last 3 weeks. And it would take 1/5 that amount of money to end extreme global poverty. Looking at this statistic here from Defense News, $1.9 trillion spent on defense in 2019. Let's do a little math here. Get the Google calculator. Hold on one sec. There it is. So let's do estimate of 60 billion to end extreme poverty. 60,000 million billion. Just double check my numbers here. Yeah, that's 60 billion. Is that right? 1,000 million. So 60 billion, and we're going to divide that. This one's going to be hard. Divided by 1.9 trillion. So that's 1,000 million billion. Man, it's hard to keep up with all these zeros. It shows you how absurd it is, isn't it? That's billion, trillion, times 100. So there you go. It would take approximately 3% of global military spending to end extreme poverty worldwide, if we can trust these stats from SIPRI and Oxfam. I don't know. Seems like this world's got its priorities a little backwards, yet we're told that these same governments that spend so much money on killing people care so much that they just had to shut down the global economy in order to save lives. No big surprise here. Independent letting us know one day ago that the coronavirus lockdown is causing creeping expansion of intrusive surveillance tactics. Campaigners warn. No big surprise there. And on that note, I got a short show today. I got some work to do. Again, it's hard to trust the official narrative on anything. If you want a prime example of that, I would strongly recommend you head on over to weathermodificationhistory.com and read the fascinating and disturbing history of weather modification on this planet. I especially enjoy going through the old newspaper news vault with articles going back all the way to 1890. Here's a patent from 1890 on precipitating rain using electricity. But you can go in here and scroll through literally hundreds of newspaper articles going back 130 years, documenting the history of the development, implementation, public discussions, and debates about the weather modification issue. And yet we are told that none of this actually happened. We are told that weather modification doesn't really work, and we are also told that geoengineering, which is weather modification on a global scale, is the only thing that can save us from CO2-induced climate change. You got to read between the lines, my friends, and the weather modification and climate change issue is a great opportunity to do just that. On that note, I'm out. I got a busy day today. Thank you all for tuning in. Back to work here in beautiful Alpine, Wyoming. Really appreciate all y'all, and I appreciate all y'all speaking up. That's why the headline, the title of today's show is Let's Keep Speaking Truth, despite all the bootlicking kooks out there talking shit. You know, if you speak up, you're going to catch flack from people. I've had people coming at me, criticizing me, and I actually, you know, to a large extent, I appreciate it because they help me get my facts right. You know, I'm not saying that criticism is no good. Constructive criticism is great. But when people, you know, make assumptions, shit, just this morning I had somebody trying to compare me to Rush Limbaugh. but when they don't have a single fucking clue about what I do and what my perspective is. And that's to be expected. So let's keep speaking the truth, despite all the bootlicking kooks out there talking shit. I love all y'all. Have a great day. I'll be back live with you again real soon. Take care of yourselves and the ones you love. Operate within your circle of influence to have the biggest influence you can on this planet, because we're in this together and we are in for a long, bumpy ride. One question that's on my mind again, and I think people should be considering it: what if this COVID-19 pandemic fiasco is a global test to see who complies and who resists? And more importantly, well, equally importantly, what if the next pandemic we see could be a lot worse? That's the thought that's on my mind right now. But despite these concerns, one thing I certainly do know is that poverty is more deadly than COVID. Tyranny is more deadly than COVID. Social isolation is more deadly than COVID. And we got to get the world back to work. I love all y'all. Have a great day. One love. Peace.